Okay, in 3500 today, we are looking at conflict in outdoor recreation. Conflict is something that we have, it's part of life. It's not always a bad thing. And there are many, many forms. We certainly have economic conflict in our lives. We have between species conflicts, and yes, that's a Photoshop picture. We have political conflict within our species, a funny way of looking at it. Just take a look. So yes, we have very different ideas on lifestyles as well. Yes, which which is more repressive, that you have to dress in that white dress or in the black? That's up to you to decide. Okay, one of the things you saw in your book is that a lot of our conflicts in recreation are between different activities. And they're often asymmetrical, where one side is bothered by the other and the other side is not bothered. So this was a study just taking a look, observations at whether there's a conflict between horsepackers and backpackers. So the categories were hiker toward stock users and stock users toward hikers. So just take a look here. Do you think it's equal? Do they equally like or dislike each other? It's kind of loaded here that I've already put dislike and undesirable up there. But those could also go to zero, the dislike and undesirable. But yeah, with a survey, taking a look, hikers towards stalkers, 36, I can't remember now if these are percents, I think so, disliked, of the hikers, disliked bumping into stock users, and undesirable out there at 53%. On the other side, those fellows up there on the horses, thinking about backpackers, doesn't seem to bother them. Most backpackers are respectful and horsepackers are respectful, and you get out of each other's way. Horses are much bigger and intimidating. So generally it is the backpacker that gets out of the way. So perhaps that's why some of that imbalance, that asymmetrical liking and disliking is going on between horsepackers and backpackers. But think about it yourself. I think everyone in the class is a backpacker or a hiker. And particularly, I guess, if you're not from the West, it's a new thing for you to run into horses. Okay, moving on, looking at some other things. Sometimes the conflict are people feel ownership, and they feel like because they got there first, everything is theirs, and anybody newer hasn't earned their place. Okay, here's a good cartoon. I don't have a laugh track, so you'll have to laugh on your own here. Okay, here's one of the ones that is mentioned in your book, and it's one of the most studied, is the conflict within activities, or even between activities in this case, of motorized versus non-motorized. And a lot of the studies that are mentioned in the book are out of the boundary waters, so they usually are motorboats versus canoes. What do you think? Is that canoer bothered by the noise and the speed of the jet ski, and is the jet ski bothered by the quiet canoer? This guy was a really nice guy. He really irritated us at first because he was noisy and fast. But then he paddled. He powered up to us, cut his engine, and we just chatted for a while. And he felt like he was no different than the canoers, that he was just there to enjoy the scenery. Not the quiet while he was moving, but once he parked. So he really didn't see himself as different, where the canoers saw themselves extremely different from the noisy, fast motor. Okay, here's another conflict. This is an interesting one that made the newspapers. No surprise, it's about cross-country skiing. The picture is not from this location. But let's see, what are they called? Not Utah Nordic. Anyway, their name's probably going to show up here in a minute. Nordic United, there we go, out of Ogden. used to put on a race called the Uller race, and Uller is one of the legendary people in Norse mythology. It was a 40-kilometer race, so a pretty substantial race. It's one of the few races where all 40 kilometers are new. You aren't going around a 5K lap. And so you would ski up one canyon and ski down another one up in the Logan area in the Wasatch. So for just one day, the snowmobiles would go out and groom a track that was 40 kilometers long. And then they would hold a race there. And I think this is about the third year of the race. A bunch of snowmobilers decided to block the race. And because they said it wasn't fair that just for 2 hours in the morning, their trailhead was blocked. And they just said that they are not going to tolerate having their freedom taken away by skiers for 2 hours, because who knows what will happen next year. So anyway, quite a conflict. Sheriff was there. Sheriff couldn't arrest them. They hadn't done anything illegal. But yeah, I've literally had a snowmobiler run over my skis just to be nasty. So yeah, there are conflicts between motorized and non-motorized. And there are conflicts. We're going to take a look at conflicts between snowboards and alpine skiers in a little while. So it isn't just motor, non-motor. That's just the classic that you saw in your readings. Around here, the heli skiers being, for $700, you can get a ride to the top and ski it, or you have to get up extra early in the morning and ski for 2 hours to get to the ridge in Big Cottonwood, Little Cottonwood. And just as you're getting there, a helicopter drops 5 skiers off. It can be quite a source of conflict. Okay, here's another one. So I've forgotten the years. Used to be illegal to have a weapon in your vehicle unless it was disassembled. So somewhere, it seems like it was under Reagan. I could be wrong. And maybe we'll hit a date here. That the dispute was whether to allow loaded guns, not just inoperable guns, but loaded with a bullet in the chamber. So yeah, it eventually became allowed. So those are some examples of conflicts. We've used the goal interference before. Remember, people are goal oriented, and when you interfere with it, then they are no longer able to achieve what they came for. And we call that conflict. So goal interference is a familiar term. So it comes out of, these are things we've talked about before. Expectancy theory is that people do things, go places with an expectation of meeting certain needs or wants. And the discrepancy theory is that something blocks them from meeting what they had expected. So familiar things, we're now bringing them over here into out of crowding, which is where we brought these up in the first place, and out of the satisfaction chapter, and taking a look at it within conflict. So that's the broad stuff. How should we define conflict? Remember, we want to start with the broad genus and then narrow down what's in, what's out. So what's your definition of conflict? Maybe even stop and write it down. Okay, so here is our genus. Conflict is a cognitive and affective state of agitation and dissonance. So we also had the theory of cognitive dissonance. And what's it due to? What is the specific? It's due to interference of meeting an expected goal. Okay, that's not pulled from a research project, but that just fits the definitions we've used in the past. So the big genus conflict is a cognitive and affective state of agitation and dissonance due to interference of meeting an expected goal. Okay, you might recall, we can't do this because this is a recorded class. But that's okay. You can still stop and do pieces of this. I'm going to pause for a second because I have to rethink it. Here we go. Okay, picking back up again. I'm just going to have you take a look at this. These are in your book, so you can spend your time there with them. Rather than do this as a class activity where we break you into groups and come up with examples, I want you to just go back to the book. I'm pretty sure that it's in 209 in the new book, but look around. It's in that chapter. These are particularly that activity style differences are an area where we have conflict. The specific significance of the resource, in other words, how each individual values it more or less, can be a source of the conflict. And then expectations of how we expect other people to view the natural environment. Okay, so eventually we are going to come back to these with that snowboard skier study that I said we were going to see, but for now, let's move on, or pause now and go to the book, or just sit here and pause the screen and read through each one of these, realizing that we have, I missed one. So down here at the bottom, the last one between 9 and 10, lifestyle tolerance differences again between people. You'll see there's a lot of overlap between these, but we can kind of separate them out. Activity style, significance of the resource, expectations of other people's perception of the resource, and then lifestyle tolerance. Okay, moving on here. So we've done this. We've refined conflict to goal interference attributed to the behavior of others based on expectancy theory, motivation, and discrepancy theory. So that's just a repeat, taking a look back. Okay, so what are the things that we expect in a national park campground? We're going to one in a couple of weeks. What are the activities and what do we expect to get out of them? What do we expect to satisfy? Because we usually don't even think about these things. We just go through the day knowing them, but we don't really parse them out. So, yeah, establishing a camp, such a simple thing. Whether that's a tent, a trailer. A lot of people create rituals around this. And the goal, why do we establish a camp? We need some protection from the weather. Insects. It's interesting how people will claim a territory, even though they're leaving it the next day. But yeah, if you walk through somebody's camp, you might hear about it. Okay, and then there are a lot of people who do creative homemaking. Hopefully, on our Winter Bowls Basic Outdoor Living Skills trip, people got real creative about their homemaking in their kitchens. Okay, preparing and eating meals we'll certainly be doing. It's required, and it can be fun. So people do use it as leisure entertainment. If all you do is boil water and throw something in it, that's not very interesting. Obtaining light after dark, whether that's a flashlight, generator, fire, it allows us to continue activities. If you don't have light, it's harder to do some activities. Sleeping and bathroom visits are required, so we do want to be able to satisfy those. We certainly are hoping there's an outhouse or a bathroom in our campground in Capitol Reef. Walking, hiking, we're going to be doing a lot of that, and bicycling. Some of it just physically feels good. Some of it we do for entertainment. Some of it we do for learning. We will probably have some group games. I know Bella's got some ideas. Hopefully we'll be able to get some rangers to come and talk to us so we can learn about their lifestyle. No drinking on our university classes, but people do share alcohol in the campground, just not with us. Okay. Yes, some people's idea is to pull that lawn chair out and spend the whole day there. And other people would rather be out hiking. So we're all pretty young, hope to be doing a lot of hiking on our trip. And one of the reasons people like campfires is that it's a way to slow down and chat and visit with each other. It's a time to do our planning. So where the conflict comes in is when you look at those activities down the left-hand side and something interferes with it. So if there are people racing ATVs around the campground, it's pretty hard to meet some of these planning, entertainment, social needs, or even being able to relax and enjoy cooking dinners. So yes, we can have conflicts of those activities, and we have to think it's not the conflict with the activity, but it's more those expected goals that we were trying to meet over there on the right side. Okay, sometimes the conflict isn't quite so obvious, that it's not between activities or interfering with an activity, but it's not meeting social norms. And if we haven't yet, we will soon go into some definitions, look at curves of what social norms are. We've made some hints toward them. I know Jeff's mentioned them. So we will in the next 2 or 3 classes talk about limits of acceptable change, and we'll be defining norms more closely than I plan to today. So conflict, if we have activities that someone interferes with our goals, we can also have social norms and have people interfere with what we think is normal. And these depend on our values and how much we attribute to them as to how much stress it causes us, which creates the dissonance and keeps us from meeting our goals. Okay, so that is, let's go back. That is one pathway of conflict, of a goal interference of social norms. And then your book has your author, and this graph has expanded since he first brought out the theory. And you can find this on page 216. I find it a little bit confusing, and I found that by turning that sensitivity to conflict box into a person, you can see I gave it a head and a pair of legs, this thing just reads better to me. So these, let's see, there are 6 items off the left side, and we did talk about these already, the first 4, as part of the Jacobs conflict model. So conflicts within activity style, different ideas of resource specificity, the mode of experience, the way we go about it, and then a lifestyle tolerance. And the book mentions the easy stuff is electronics versus not electronics. But it can be it can even just be the way people wear their hair. And then we have each of these individual people also have expectations in general for that activity, for that resource. And then people have different tolerances for safety too. So those 6 things are all part of each person. And that's the easier way for me to understand this graphic. And then coming down from the top of the page is the goal interference. And it can be a direct contact, it can be indirect. And so we have an individual, and then something comes in that causes interference. And so that person has to make some decisions. We talked about these as coping mechanisms for some of them. And one of them is we're looking at we're defining conflict here. It could be intra-activity or within an activity. It could be across 2 different activities, like the snowmobiles versus the skiers, or the helicopter versus people hiking up. Sometimes the conflict is with the managers because they have a different set of rules than the users want, and sometimes it's other users. So here's where I was headed, that we did run through a list of coping behaviors with crowding. You might recall that these were displacement either through time or space, or we just decide that, okay, for this trip, it's not what I was expecting, but I'm going to make the best of it, or this place really isn't what I thought, and I'm still going to make the best of it. And generally at the end of those, even though some of us are good at rationalizing, we do lose some satisfaction if we've had something that has interfered with our goals. So that's how to read that expanded conflict model. I think it's much easier when you think of those first 6 items are inside each individual, and then everything on the right is when they come in contact with either another person or different values, whether it's within an activity or between activities or with the manager. And then we have to cope. And however well we do that is how much satisfaction we gain or lose. All right, so that's the model. Okay, so activity style we've mentioned. Personal meaning assigned to recreation activity gets talked about here in the book. The intensity. Some people are very intense. Taking a look at this picture off to the right, the person with the big backpack and all the climbing gear, to me, is looking much more intense than the two with day packs. So he may be looking at those two and thinking, wow, what are they doing here? And they might be snickering at him and saying, wow, it's too bad he doesn't lighten up and enjoy the place. Also looking at equipment. He's got all this climbing hardware. Is he thinking that he's a higher status? He's the one that belongs there. And probably, but not necessarily, owning that equipment shows that he has experience using it. So activity style, if just 2 people, I guess it's 3 people passing each other, there might be a tiny bit of conflict. Nothing that anyone deals with, but other times it's more serious. Okay, significance attached to the specific resource. And again, let's go back to this picture, because the guy with climbing gear must value this place, and it happens to be the Tetons. He's headed up into the bowl between the South Middle and Grand Teton. So yes, that you can go walking like the other two almost anywhere, but to do climbing, you do need a very specific place. So he might be wondering, do these other folks really belong here? They're clearly not climbers. Okay, so there could be a little bit of social value or personal value to this specific resource. And then, how focused? He's looking very focused, very intense. And it really could just be an odd thing of this photograph of the moment. Where the other two are looking much more casual. So again, that might be a related source of conflict. And it's just for a moment. Just as they pass by each other, they'll move on and forget it. And same with lifestyle. Should you really be investing that much time and money in something as unique as climbing? And an awful lot of us are climbers, so we think that you should. And we enjoy climbing and doing things and scrambling and getting to hard places. Okay, so here is the study of recreation conflict. And in this case, they have chosen skiers and snowboarders. They really are just trying to take a look at some of those ideas that we just flipped through very quickly now, and that were in the 10 items that we looked at the beginning. So what they're going to do is just take those items, that theory that these are sources of conflict, other than activity conflict, and see if they can measure them. So they're going to be doing this by survey. So we need some definitions. So the conflict, normative beliefs about unacceptable behavior is going to be examined. So we're going to look at normative, which is going to be defined as that which is most acceptable, and then compare that to other behaviors that are unacceptable. Okay, conflict is goal interference, which we've already talked about, and also motivation interference, although goal interference is the thing they focus on here. Okay, so why are you feeling conflict? Okay, Expectancy theory we've already had, so these people are using it. Humans engage in activities to realize a group of known and expected and valued outcomes to meet their goals. Okay, so that's going to be used exactly the way we learned it in this study. And then discrepancy theory, we've talked about. They're using it here. Its satisfaction is the difference between desired and achieved goals. So what you wanted and what you actually end up with, it's the difference between those two that's the discrepancy, which is the cause of conflict. Okay, I got ahead of myself. So conflict is a special application of discrepancy theory when the reason for your goal not being met is due to other people's unacceptable behaviors, at least unacceptable to you, the person who's reporting the conflict. And so they're going to go asking who's feeling conflicted. All right, so there are a number of propositions here. Conflict increases when a goal is not met due to others' unacceptable behaviors, right? That's our definition. So we're just going to test our definition of conflict. So when a goal is not met due to others' unacceptable behavior, that's going to be among the things that the survey is going to be asking. Okay, so we need some variables. Let's see, dependent variables are in-group conflict and norms, what's acceptable or unacceptable within our group, so skier to skier. And then out-group would be what are the norms of acceptable, unacceptable behavior. And in this case, we're asking across skiers and snowboarders. Also, the date for this, I believe, is somewhere in the 90s. And I think a lot of this conflict has gone away since then, but that's when snowboards were relatively new to ski resorts, at least in high use, and skiers had a hard time accepting this new sport. Okay, so some independent variables. These are the ones that we can adjust. And predictors using, again, Jacob and Schreier. The Jacob and Schreier was written in the 80s. I'm pretty sure this study was done in the 90s. We probably passed a date and I missed it. So these are the things that we talked about. Activity styles. So what are the personal meanings individuals assign to the activity? And meanings, operationalized meaning, we've made it something that we can measure. And we're going to assume, we're going to make this leap that personal meanings grow over time. So meanings are going to be stronger with more years of activity and more frequency per year. Okay, so that's how we're going to be asking about activity style. People have done it a long time. People have done it for less time. Okay, resource specificity. So this is the significance that recreationists attach to a specific resource. And we're really looking at resort skiing here. Mode of experience is going to be defined here as a continuum ranging from focused to unfocused. And I'm not sure we'll see how that's operationalized. Okay, lifestyle tolerance. We'll be asking on our surveys. They will be asking. They already asked, sorry. Tendency to accept or reject other people's lifestyles. And then what are your reactions to those specific behaviors? So, and then safety is not defined. We're just is a concern of physical harm, I think would be as close as we can get here. So without going into the details too much, hypothesis 1, skiers and snowboarders will report more out-group than in-group unacceptable behaviors. Okay, so will we find that? Will this study find that skiers and snowboarders will report more out-group, meaning across skiers to snowboarders, than within groups, meaning snowboarders to snowboarders and skiers to skiers? Okay, and that was supported when they went out and collected all of the surveys. People were noticing more conflicts, reporting more conflicts across the different activities of skiing and snowboarding. So that holds up the theory. Some more hypotheses. Skiers will be less tolerant of snowboarders than vice versa. And I've already hinted toward that skiers are feeling like this is their place. Skiers were there first. And then hypothesis 6, skiers will perceive more safety-related problems associated with snowboarding than vice versa. And again, their attitudes were set a while ago. And yes, that asymmetrical, that skiers had more troubles with boarders than boarders had with skiers. So that also fit the Jacob theory, some of those points. And then lumping together hypotheses 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And again, we're not going into great detail. We're just taking a look at the end of the study saying, which were supported and which were not. So, and those hypotheses relate to activity style, resource specificity, mode of experience, and tolerance. That those are likely to, the more different those are between across skiers and snowboarders, the more likely we'll have conflict. And so looking at these activity style differences were supported. Resource specificity was not supported. In other words, both of them needed the same resource and both of them respected it. Mode of experience was partially supported. Tolerance for lifestyle, the outgroup asymmetry was supported. And the safety issues will increase the perception of safety issues. We should be careful there. Will increase the likelihood of conflict. And that's more asymmetrical because you remember skiers thought that snowboarders were more dangerous. And they always blame that on the blind side, where a skier is always facing forward. Doesn't mean they're always sliding forward, or it doesn't mean they're always looking where they're going. Okay, so at least they're using skiers and snowboarders back to those Jacob and Schreier. I missed a syllable there. When surveys are done, do support those ideas, those original theories. Okay, here's another one, another study taking a look at hikers and mountain bikers. And let's see what the conclusions were here. So conflict, once again, goal interference. So proposition first one, if interpersonal conflict for interpersonal conflict is to occur, then physical presence or behavior of an individual or group must interfere with the goals of another individual. So we're once again just testing the biggest, broadest definition and hypothesis. And then we're asking here, is it not just physical presence, but is it also these social differences or social acceptability? So this proposition is sort of backwards here. Social values of conflict can occur between groups who do not share the same norms or values, and independent of the physical presence or the actual contact between the groups. So a quick example, when I've seen ATV tire tracks in a wilderness area, the ATV driver was long gone, but I still had a social value conflict, even though they were no longer there. So, okay. Once again, conflict is goal interference, and conflict can be unacceptable behaviors blended with groups who do not share the same values. So one of them is the first one there is about behaviors, and the other one is a recognition that you don't share the same values. So the unacceptable behavior in the example I gave you is, I find it's an unacceptable behavior to drive your vehicle there. And then, so it's not just the physical presence of the vehicle, but we move to that second part, conflict groups who do not share the same values, because I value the quiet of a wilderness area, and that there are not many wilderness areas compared to the number of places you can drive an ATV. Okay, back to this study. Conflict is, here's our definition. Conflict is a cognitive and affective state of agitation and dissonance due to interference of meeting a goal. So, in these studies, interference has been shown or observed because of these two things, unacceptable behaviors and different values. So, assumptions, this is kind of a review, just showing that every study has to run through all of these parts of the study. People are motivated by expected outcomes they value. expectancy theory. Interference with achieving expected outcome causes agitation and dissonance, so cognitive dissonance theory too. The interference need not be in the form of a person. I just gave you an example. When shifting to a new goal due to conflict, first there is a conflict trigger, and then some time is required to make the shift. And that's where we were talking about with crowding, about your different options for your displacement or your rationalization. Okay. And this study between hikers and mountain bikers, I'd almost forgotten what it was, did support, with their surveys, that conflict increases the more that other activity interferes with your goals. Okay. Some of the things we can do to manage conflict out there. This isn't our main management class, so we won't hit everything here, but we can hit some of this stuff. So recreation opportunity spectrum is going to be described to you very soon in one of the next couple of lessons. So we're going to hang on to that. But what that really is, we've hit this idea already in the class, is that you do want to zone for different activities. You do want to have wilderness areas that are non-motorized, so that there are places for hikers and horsepackers to go where they're not dealing with motors. And anyway, you'll see that it's not just wilderness versus the rest of the world, but we'll divide recreation opportunity spectrum typically into 6 major zones. Then each one of those gets subdivisions. We like to think that education works in the management of conflict. We'll spend more time on this topic in the environmental interpretation class, where we'll talk about direct and indirect ways of educating people. So a really highly logical versus a more emotional approach. And then we have these uninformed, these are some categories of depreciative behaviors. One of them is uninformed behaviors. So people they don't know that their behavior is wrong. And persuasive education here is quite effective. So you explain to somebody what they're doing, that what they're doing is wrong for these reasons, what are the harms being caused, and then teaching them the correct thing to do. Closely related to that, they might know the behavior is wrong, but they don't know how to do anything else. So once again, education and demonstration of the right skills will help most of these people stop being in conflict with other people or the management rules. Then there are some where the people do know how to do it. They are capable of better behavior, but they choose to be inconsiderate. Again, we always hope education is going to work. For these folks, it's probably not going to work as well. And then there's that last category of intentional illegal behaviors. And you need law enforcement for these. They are breaking laws. You as a park ranger or a visitor or just another person out there really are not likely to stop most of this. They made a choice to do this probably even before they showed up. So management of conflict, that's the real quick of it. We will get more pieces of it throughout this semester and in the fall. Okay, that's the end of this segment. I do have 2 parts to this class. The second part is going to be about groups and conflict. Okay, we are coming at conflict from a slightly different angle. We're going to emphasize an individual within a group. So let's take a look. First of all, what is a group? What does it take to be a group? So this is a class of 4th graders, and Will knows this ranger. I've forgotten her name. She also teaches skiing at Snowbird, I believe. So is this collection of 4th graders a group? And if you look up definitions of a group is a collection that has something in common. So if instead this was one of her regular tours and individuals just showed up, would that be a group? And by a social psychologist, they would say, no, that would be an aggregate of people who have just arrived. But they aren't a group. Maybe by the end of the hour, they'll feel like a group. By then, they'll have some shared experience. But yes, the difference between a group and just an aggregate of people is going to matter to a social psychologist. It's probably not a distinction you're going to make most of your life in general conversation. Okay, so whether it's an aggregate or a collection of people who have something in common, and maybe it's just one person here. So are we, humans, us, are we affected by the mere presence of another or others? So here are two people out on a training run. Maybe some of you run, some of you train, some of you bicycle, some of you ski. Do you ski better? Do you snowboard harder in the presence of others? Yeah, even if you didn't really think of them as a competition, do you behave differently when you're alone than when you're with others? So we want to be considering that and how that affects outdoor recreation. So we can shorthand write this by the increase of others changes behavior. So having more others, one or more others, the delta there is the symbol for change. Does that change your behavior? And does it increase your behavior? Does your behavior improve? Or does your behavior decrease? So do you have better training runs? Do you have more fun skiing in the presence of others? Or does it make it harder to have others? Let's look at a couple of different situations. So here's presenting. How many of you like public speaking? In this semester, you'll be doing you've already done your Mill Creek talk. All of you survived it, and most of your comments were that it went all right, but you were really nervous about it at first. So are you affected by having others in the room when you're presenting? Does your behavior go up, or do you get more nervous and make more mistakes? So the increase in others changes your behavior, if we believe what we saw in the last slide. Does your behavior improve, or does it get more difficult? So that's the question I already asked. So what we would like is a theory that makes the distinction between those two. So we are already going on the assumption that the presence of others changes our behavior. So we would love to come up with an if-then that can summarize a whole bunch of observations. So it's not just about ATVs versus hikers. It's not just about hikers versus mountain bikes. And it's not just about motorboats and canoes. But we don't want the activity. We want to instead have what's behind the activity. What are the goals and such that we can summarize this. When will we improve and do better? Most of us do run faster in a race than we ever would on a training day. So yeah, let's see what we can come up with, or what other people have come up with in the past, other researchers. So the increase of others leads to arousal. Okay. Does that sound right? Does that something that sounds right to you, whether it's the arousal because of a motor, arousal because of a training partner, arousal because somebody stuck a camera on you when you're about to go off a jump? Maybe you wouldn't even have gone off the jump if someone wasn't going to film it. Okay, so the presence of others increases arousal. That's not getting specific about the activity. Instead, we're doing to this general. And that leads to what? Well, oops, I'm going backwards instead of forward. One idea is that it leads to increasing your dominant response. So if your dominant response is to be competitive, having other competitors around that arousal will increase your dominant response of wanting to win. So if winning is something you really want to do, that's the easier behavior. for you. And if it's a really difficult behavior, like perhaps speaking in front of a crowd, what's aroused isn't better behavior, but instead you make more mistakes as you get nervous in front of a lot of people. So your dominant response might be, there are people who love to speak to a crowd. So the more people there, the more they are going to be energized to speak. And then there are other people who, the more people their dominant response is to get nervous and make more mistakes. So there's our theory. If in the presence of others we are aroused, and what is aroused then is either easy behavior. What's aroused is your dominant response. Is this a situation where it's easy for you, or is it a situation that makes you more nervous? So rather than naming each activity individually, we have this instead. Increasing others increases arousal, which increases your dominant response. So then it just depends, which is your dominant response in that situation. Does it make things easier? Does it make them harder? Okay, so this leads us to the theory of social facilitation. Yes, we have lots of theories in this class. Theories are just the big propositions of the if-thens. Okay, let's just ask you a few of these things. During outdoor recreation, my dominant reaction to the presence of others is, well, let's take a look at these pictures. If you're rock climbing, do you climb better, or do you get scared and nervous and have a hard time? Or same with running rivers. Do you get better at it? How many of you are comfortable yet with a map and compass, which is going on in the bottom right picture? And how many of you does that still make you nervous to think that you would have to do an off route with a group of people by map and compass? So yes, does it depend on the activity? Almost all of us. We are better at some, and it's often a ratio of how much do I know compared to the other people around me. We often make that judgment as to how we behave when we're considering the people around us. Okay. Let's see. Does the presence of others increase or decrease my chance of achieving my desired experience? So if your desired experience in the bottom right corner is to learn how to do map and compass, is it easier to learn it with a group that can help teach you, or is it easier to learn it by yourself? Which one of those would make you more nervous? Which one of those would make you likely lead to better behaviors and better outcomes? So same with rock climbing, same with river running, skiing, hiking, mountain biking, all these. All right, so crowding. We had a day of crowding, and I hope that what you're getting out of this class today is that crowding is just one specific form of conflict. So all the things that we've talked about in crowding are going to apply across to other conflicts as well. Okay, so crowding enhances your dominant response. And again, in a race situation, a lot of people do race better in a race with a crowd than they would have on their own. Individual start races are interesting things compared to mass start races. Okay, let's look at the other side. Instead of increasing, what do individuals exert less during a group? Do people pool their group efforts toward a common goal? So do we loaf in a group? Can we disappear into the group? Or do we pitch in and work together as a group? So some experiments were done using a tug-of-war. I don't know how they actually did use the scale to measure people's pull, but when there was a string of people, each individual pulled 18% less than when they were working alone. So no, we didn't get better in a tug-of-war with the presence of others. Do individuals exert less in a group? Let's take a look at some other outcomes. So in class group projects, everybody agreed that social loafing occurred. None of them accepted that it was them. Right now with COVID, we're doing fewer group projects, but they're got to be harder to do since you can't meet in person very easily. Okay, so asking people in a survey, getting back down here to the bottom light blue, looking at class group projects, everybody agreed that social loafing occurred, but nobody accepted that it was them. They always said it was somebody else. Huh. Okay, so arousal when evaluated individually, like the tug of war, versus social loafing when evaluated as a group. So do you get more done when you're down here on the floor by yourself rather than up there working with the group? And at least by the tug of war, you probably do get more done when you're working down there by yourself. However, if there isn't time to get for everyone to do everything, that's the main reason you have groups. So when we were splitting up the duties for Capitol Reef, if one person had to do all of the duties of the 6 teams that we had, we wouldn't have been able to finish it in the 2 hours that we had allotted. Okay, so some implications for conflicts within a group. So here's a class of students, and we've just had a conflict, and you can see that some people here are a little bit concerned because they're getting chewed out for having bad behaviors. And there are a couple other people who are just kind of snickering over, of course you're in trouble. You did a behavior that we've talked about that shouldn't be done. In other words, a couple of people just took off and left everybody else behind him. It took us a while to chase up and catch him. Okay, so implications for conflicts within groups, looking at those social loafing versus helping individually, and also looking at dominant responses. So what are the implications for resource managers? There's a park ranger there down in the Grand Canyon. How do we get better compliance with regulations? And considering that people are acting within a group. Okay, so again, people loaf less when the task is challenging, appealing, or involving. So here's the park ranger, a different ranger and a different park. This is in Arches now. And so when she's asking, and this was mainly a talk on LNT in this area, how does she make the project more challenging, more appealing, and more involving to the whole group? Do you speak to the whole group? Do you try to address people individually? I think what we looked at was that if you are really talking to the group and people don't feel individually involved, you're going to get the social loafing. If you're a speaker who can make people feel like you're talking to each individual one of them, you're more likely to get compliance with the rules. Okay, we also within a group have this word I can never pronounce. Being in a group leads to de-individuation, meaning people are not identifiable. It's not just by being an individual in a large group. There are other situations where being de-individuated or unidentifiable. Looking at these two sets of people at the top, the snowmobiles, you can see their faces. They're wearing hats and sunglasses. The Nordic skiers on the right stopped for lunch. Also wearing hats, you can see their faces. And then you look at the bottom picture, and here snowmobilers are wearing helmets with black visors. So it's pretty hard to tell who anyone is. And license plates, the license numbers on a snowmobile are pretty tiny and hard to find. So again, they are unidentifiable. So which one is more likely to lead to better behaviors? Being de-individuated, whether it's by how you dress or by whether you are a member of a large group. So, when do people lose their sense of self in the group or become de-individuated? Okay, sorry about that word. Yeah, a large group, the bigger the group, the more difficult it is to pick out an individual. In this case, it's late at night, it's dark. Finding anyone twice in a group on a night like this would be pretty difficult. So Yeah, as people lose their individuality, they also lose a lot of their self-restraint, and they might do something they would not do alone. So you need to be thinking about this as a ranger of how you want to approach people. Do you want to approach a large group of people, or do you want to approach individuals? Okay. So yes, individuals are aroused by groups. Remember, that's from the beginning. Individual responsibility can be diffused through groups, and normal inhibitions can be diminished through anonymity. Bunch of words here. Okay, so how do we deal with that? Why is that of interest to a park ranger? You'll recall that even small groups where you are individual to each other pull less as a group. There's more social loafing. Groups can energize, but they can also make individuals be unidentifiable. Same with helmets, dark SUVs, tinted windows. A majority of the conflicts I've had with vehicles when I'm bicycling have been dark tinted SUV windows. They're bigger. I can't tell who they are. And those, I've been run off the road into the gutter by several larger SUVs where I had no idea who was driving them because I just couldn't see into the windows. So yeah, cause and effect here, that's a correlation. I can't tell you if that's a cause and effect. Is a person who's likely to do that also likely to buy the tinted windows? Or is it that, oh, I have tinted windows, they can't see me, I'm not going to behave as well? So de-individuation, whatever the situation, affects people's behavior. That's important to you as a ranger. Okay. It doesn't just go one way. That if we can give altruistic cues, people will act anonymously quite well too. You will see lists of donors, and you'll see quite a few anonymous donors. I know I gave to a scholarship fund recently and preferred to give anonymously rather than letting other people see that I could afford to give to this. Okay, so altruistic clues, such as a nurse's uniform, people tend to be more positive, more negative. Like clan outfits people tend to be more violent. Also, clan outfits de-individuate you. So we've got two things going on there. So being anonymous makes one less self-conscious, more aware of accepting of what's going on in the group, and the whole group can disconnect from their normal attitudes. So only a few people in the group might really stir up everybody, and other people start following it. That should sound familiar to January 6th of 2021. Okay, polarization. That's going on in this country right now pretty severely. Do groups intensify our opinions for good or bad? Does it lead to mob violence, or does it lead to more people behaving like the Red Cross? Do groups intensify conflicts? So here's an idea, something I've done with classes before. We're not together, so we can't really do this. But I like to ask this anyway of you today. I want you to write down your answer. An 18-year-old male backpacker, Jake, has been backpacking with groups since he was 12 years old as a scout. All y'all are contemplating a week-long spring break backpacking trip to a new place with a group of friends, including you. Everything is planned. The food is purchased. Most unfortunately, everyone in a different class from Jake gets a 25-page paper assigned. No one else can go. Do you advise your friend Jake to go solo for a week or not? So I do want you to think about this, and I want you to write down yes or no. I do advise Jake to go solo, or I don't. I say don't go. Sorry, you like the rest of us are not going to be going on this trip. So first of all, write yes, Jake should go. No, Jake should not go. And then what are the other pieces of information that you would like to know? So write down a couple of your questions. And with those written down, we would then stop and have a discussion, your yes or no written down, stop and have a discussion across the class where we all start saying yes and no and give our reasons why. And what's interesting is how often that group discussion will change individual choices, and usually for the more risky. So I've given you the answer to this. Groups are generally not more cautious, than the individuals. Studies have shown, though, that the tendency, whatever started the conversation, if the conversation started conservative, it will continue being conservative. If the first few people that spoke up were really pushing for Jake to go, then the theory here is that the rest of the group would start shifting and people would change their answer. So then I would ask people at the end, did you change your answer? What would you say now? Should Jake go or Jake not go? And take a look at how that conversation had gone in the group. Okay, don't get to do that today, but maybe someday you can do it on your own with a group of people. The idea is that the new information is going to lead to your decisions. That would be the best way. But if it's just instead persuasive because of who spoke loudest or who spoke first, who has the stronger personality, decisions within a group can be pretty interesting. Mostly I like to think that groups make better decisions after a discussion. Are groups more cautious than individuals? Probably not most of the time. So how does that affect a manager? What do you think? Here are a bunch of, these are 14, 15, 16-year-old students. In Alaska, you can see a glacier coming down in the water. You can see those white dots in the background water are icebergs coming off the glacier. Do you think any one of these kids would have gone swimming by themselves in that cold of water? No, but as a group, they were willing to. They hadn't, even when we were in other places where the water was warmer, they weren't going swimming. But here, for some reason, one of them got the idea and talked everyone else into it. So I think people do talk each other into being a little bit more foolish quite often in groups. Another warning about groups, that groups do over time tend to find their leader and follow that dominant personality. So the other individuals in the group will stop bringing up more cautious ideas if it's a cautious leader. On the other hand, if it's a very active leader, people stop bringing up being cautious. So you have to be careful when you've been in a group for a while, because you tend to not dare diverge and bring up other possibilities other than what the most dominant people are saying. So watch for that. That's what we hit. Okay. So we've been mostly looking at how groups influence individuals, but how, on the other hand, looking the other direction, how do individuals influence a group? And we've made hints toward this. So as a fill in the blank increases or decreases an individual's influence on the group, increases or decreases. So just to be silly, let's say as a taller person, as more tall people increase. Okay, if a person is tall, I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time making it fit this sentence because I'm making this up as we go. A tall person increases or decreases, still not working. Okay, as the height increases, an individual's influence in the group increases or decreases. Do you think that? I mean, this is just an example. Height is what I was after, not, yeah. So as a person's height increases, an individual's influence on the group increases. Do tall people have more effect on a group? Okay, so that's the kind of idea I'm after. But here are some that have been shown to actually have more influence than height. Okay, so the more consistent a person is, or as consistency increases, as persistence, as self-confidence. With self-confidence, we're likely to say as self-confidence increases, the individual's influence on the group increases. As the person has a second backer or more backers increases, then the individual's influence on the group increases. And then here's just a whole list of these positive ones that the more persuasive their communication skills are, the more optimistic they are, the more energetic they are, the more social charisma they have, the more intelligence, the more likable they are, the more alike the other people in the group are, the more these things increase. So you can see that their opposite would have the opposite effect. The more erratic a person is, probably decreases their influence on a group. The less they try, the opposite of persistence, then the less influence they'll have on a group. The less energetic they are, the less influence they're going to have on a group. So when you're thinking about how you want to affect a group, whether it's your group of friends or whether you're the ranger and you need to affect a group that's got some behaviors that need to change, you want to be looking at these traits at the bottom to help you influence a group. Okay, so I've already hinted to this, the effect on conflict, the effect on management of knowing that those personality traits does increase your influence on a group, can help you as a manager. So in a situation of conflict, boy, remember that a group feels pretty individuated and not individually responsible. It can be hard to address the whole group and be effective, and that's why we looked at those traits. Oops, that was it. I thought I had one more screen here. So yes, think about it as a manager, as a teacher, as a guide, whatever your future is. There will be times that you are part of a group and recognize that being part of a group you might behave different than you wish you would. And then on the other hand, if you need to address a group, it's difficult for an individual to change the group. So one more tie to these ideas is that if you can figure out who is the dominant group within a group or the dominant individual within a group, it's probably going to be easier to affect change in one individual who can then help you change the behaviors of everyone else. So addressing the entire group is one way. Expect more social loafing, people not expecting you to be able to pick them out, versus if you really can establish eye contact with one or two who seem to be the leaders and convince them, then you'll probably have more effect on changing behaviors. Okay, those are our thoughts on groups and conflict.